because we would microdose and meditate at 6:45 in the morning, and then go into Jiu Jitsu class and then roll it. And I was like, so how'd you feel? And they were like, well, my Jiu Jitsu was like really fluid. Like I felt really like on game. I was like, nice. And they were like, yeah. And I didn't have like the voices that are normally in my head, like thinking about bills and work and stuff like that. That wasn't there either. And I was like, that's the point.
Hey, are you a Canadian Armed Forces veteran that has ever wondered, man, I'd really like to be able to go down to Tulum, Mexico, do some BJJ, and explore the inner depths of my consciousness through the use of psychedelics? Well, if you have, cool. But until I spoke to Dave from Becoming Om, I was not aware that this program existed. And the cool thing about it is that we're going to get Justin Trudeau to pay for us all to come down. So if you want to learn more and you want to explore this topic and how BJJ and psychedelics are having a profound effect on our community, then you're going to want to stay tuned to the end, because we're going to go over everything about this awesome organization and how you can get involved. So stay tuned. Hey folks, sitting with Dave Zwoboda from the United States of America. Love having my American friends chat about what they're up to. And he's got a really interesting retreat that I wish I had known about earlier, seeing as that I know one of the chief instructors, and he never mentioned it to me, and he's been on the podcast twice. So Seb, I'm calling you out, bro. We got to talk more about this awesome thing that you're doing with Dave in Mexico called Operation Flowstate. So I'm going to let Dave explain a little bit of his backstory and get into what this is. And Dave, welcome to the podcast. It's so cool to be chatting with you, and I love to learn, and I'm sure that people are listening love to learn a little more about what you're doing in the Jiu Jitsu holistic healing space.
Right on, man. Thank you. And yeah, dude, I think I do have to have a chat with Seb about this whole marketing strategy, because that was definitely part of the game plan of bringing him on board, is that like he's a known quantity in this space, right? So I figured he would bring a bunch of people.
He's kind of a big deal. I'm not gonna lie, he's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, and it has not panned out that way. So yeah, man. we gotta chat about that. But yeah, man. So Operation Flowstate, I'll give like a little primer on that, and then maybe we can like backpedal and talk about how I got into all this stuff, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
So Operation Flowstate is the world's first holistic health summit where it meets a jiu-jitsu retreat specifically for first responders and veterans. So a little over a month ago, I pulled off the world's first ever plant medicine infused jiu-jitsu camp for regular people. So we were combining spirituality, civilians. I don't know. Me?
I appreciate being considered non-regular or irregular. That's important.
Right, maybe.
Thank you.
Maybe I should check my language on that one. I'm learning, man. I'm learning.
We're the anti-snowflake people. We invented the term snowflake. So are you special fucking snowflake there, troop? And then everybody took it. I was like, all right, okay, cool.
This is why I've enjoyed working with the veteran community so much, is because you actually have a fucking sense of humor and you don't get offended by everything. No. It's interesting because like my wife is a yoga instructor, and like everything in like the plant medicine world now is like very like kind of woke liberal politics infused into it. I don't know like how deep we want to get into that on this podcast.
I want to tackle this literally right now. I want to get right into it. Like, screw your background for now. Let's talk about this. I'm noticing something. So it's funny that you mentioned like the plant medicine, like it's infused with like liberal kind of woke politics. I'm seeing the complete opposite. So
interesting.
I didn't know anything about psychedelics. I didn't know anything about ayahuasca. My intro to like drug culture was because I got injured, and here in Canada, like, hey, do you want free weed? I'm like, sure. Yeah. So I started smoking and taking edibles, and it's been cool. Like I found its use to be somewhat beneficial, especially when I was recovering. I don't really use it that much, but my experience with psychedelics has been nil, except for I ordered some microdose psilocybin from Vancouver, and they sent it to my door. And I was like, that's cool. It took a little bit, didn't really notice anything. However, I started having a conversation with one of my buddies. He went to an ayahuasca retreat, and the stories he was telling me were just mind blowing. I had a hard time wrapping my head around like his experience, because I know him really well, and I know he's not lying to me. But the depth of experience was incredible. And then I went to Las Vegas not long after, and it was a military influencer conference, which was an awesome experience. Going back again in November, and all these random conversations. I had 4 different conversations with random veterans, and they were all saying, "Man, psychedelics has completely fixed me."
Yeah.
And then I talked to Toby, who on the podcast as well, and he's like, "Yeah, I went from like 15 like psychotic mental health medications to like 1." And I'm thinking like, wow, okay, there's something here, man. And I'm seeing it from like the veteran space where typically we're more conservative. So this whole idea of like drug culture and stuff didn't seem to be something that would like jive, but it's because I think we're at a breaking point. We know the system is not working, and we know we need to find something that does work, and we're open to new solutions. And I couldn't believe how many cool conversations I had. And that's when I said, okay, we're on to something here. And I think the veteran population is going to be the one that cracks open this like Pandora's box in a good way for mental health recovery with using ancient healing practices. So anyways, that's just there's going to be, I'm an optimist. There's going to be a unification, I think, and we're going to be able to share experiences between like those like liberal, because typical like hippie was like, hey man, peace, like screw the government, man, and then take some psychedelic drugs and take some LSD. But now they're like the squares. They're like, no, follow what the government says. Like, shut the fuck up, sit in your house.
I know.
It doesn't make any sense. Like the conservatives are the cool people. What's going on?
If you want to get like real conspiratorial, it does make a lot of sense because there's some theories. I don't know if you entertain conspiracy rabbit holes. But
please go as deep as you want.
There's evidence that the CIA infiltrated the hippie movement basically to delegitimize it, because in the beginning of the Vietnam War, the anti-war protests were actually quite legitimate. There were people in suits marching, like protesting, very legitimate discussion and discourse going on. And then the CIA didn't like that, and they infiltrated it, and they made it into this like hippie, like drug use, free love thing in order to delegitimize the argument. So it became, you're against the war. What are you, a fucking hippie? As opposed to like, you're against the war. You don't want us to be mired in this endless conflict where we're wasting human lives. So, and then you trace that to now where, like you said, those people have become the squares of like, why aren't you quintuple boosted? Like, hail Pfizer, right? And again, it's the same. I'm sorry, dude. I don't know the politics and leanings of this show, but I'm assuming that we're on the same page. All right. So if you follow that conspiracy rabbit hole, it actually makes perfect sense. And yeah, dude, I think psychedelics are the path forward. And I agree with you that veterans sort of leading the charge on this, it's like you can't deny it, right? So if it was this like hippie free love thing, it's like, oh, cool, you guys just want to do fucking drugs. But no, you have like Navy SEALs talking about this stuff. You have fighter pilots talking about this stuff and how it's healed them, and they can talk about it in a concise, cogent manner. Or, you listen to your podcast with Toby where he's sharing his stories. Like the stuff is undeniable. And so leading with the veteran community, I do think is a really key thing for sort of the widespread adoption of this. And yeah, it is interesting because the military community generally kind of conservative, but I would also say like results oriented, right? You're not going to just accept the bullshit coming down from above because it's what's being told to you if you know that it's bullshit. Like I feel like that's kind of a misconception about the military, is that everyone's just following orders and not questioning anything. But it's like, if you think something's bullshit, you don't want to do it, just like any other human being. So at least that's my understanding. I'll preface this whole podcast by saying most of what I know about the military comes from the Jocko podcast and the movie Black Hawk Down. So
you're good. You're basically a qualified private then.
Well, yeah, that's what I think. Thank you for confirming that. But yeah, so getting back to like that's why I enjoy working with this population of people, because veterans are generally serious about doing stuff, right? They're not, for the most part, not just like all talk. They actually want to change things. They actually have like leadership and following directions capabilities. Like they're coachable people, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And they're interested in exploring new solutions to problems that have been plaguing them for too long. And it's undeniable, the problems that are plaguing you guys, like the number seems to increase every time they do a new study on how many veterans kill themselves every day. Like that number is only going up. And it's pretty fucking clear that we need to find some things to do about it, and that the current things that we do about it aren't working very well. It seems to me in Canada specifically, the government just throws marijuana at the problem. And if the problem doesn't go away, they say, hey, have you tried killing yourself? Because we can help you with that.
Oh, I was about to say, like, oh, yeah, they throw marijuana, and it's like, that doesn't work. Oh, yeah, maybe just like offing yourself. It doesn't sound like things are going well.
Bro. Yeah, you should probably just die. Have you considered that, Dave, actually?
No, it's not on my priority of things right now, I'll be honest.
All right.
So I do enjoy the occasional toke from time to time, but I found hitting the jiu-jitsu mats, going for a workout, playing with my kids, and getting some sunlight are probably my best therapy solutions. And that's why I try to promote it as much as possible. So
sunlight and jiu-jitsu, you sound like a far-right extremist right now.
I am. Have you seen all that stuff on the news? I love it because it's just there to like inflame people like myself, and so I have to get really stoic with things like, he who angers you owns you. I go, hey, I'm not letting this journalist get to me. This is what they're doing. They're trying to just inflame me and then have me do like a insensitive post and be like, see, they are crazy. And it's like, who's they, man? Am I part of the they? It's a crazy wild world, man. But I think as we get closer and closer to, if you want to call it the truth, which is like the universal, I guess, existential purpose of humanity, you'll never truly get there. I'm seeing more and more that if you do something that requires you to be in a state of controlled stress or panic, like being choked to death, and getting some sunlight and having a good community that could consist of, kids, family, friends, and you do just a little bit of exercise and you have some good water and have a little bit of protein, like it's almost like, all right, the ancient Greeks, Romans, this is all they said. They didn't complicate it. It seems like we've just overcomplicated things, and we always try to find the most complicated thing to solve our problems when in fact the solutions have already been there. So, on the topic of jiu-jitsu, like, this is something that I'm very new to the sport. I only recently went back on Friday last week. Cool. And took a little bit of hiatus. My son started to. I love the fact that we're doing it together. He busts my balls because he's been consistent, and he's 7, and he's like, I'm going to take you down. Like, I'm going to double leg you. Like, I'm going to mess you up. And I love the confidence. I love the confidence. But I am worried that in like 6 years, maybe 5 years, he may actually
choke you.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So I can't let that happen, Dave. Just so you know, I can't let that happen. But with that being said, like, why are you doing something that relates to jiu-jitsu and bringing veterans into the fold when you clearly were working with like the civilian population? What drew you towards veterans and trying to help them out?
Yeah. I guess it's kind of an interesting evolution of like how I got here. Most of it, to be completely honest, happened by accident. And I just sort of leaned into what was working and what felt right and what was helping people. So my actual background is that I'm a doctor of physical therapy. So like I went to school my whole life to become a PT, graduated, oriented 24 years of my life to pursuing this goal, and then achieved it and was like, oh, I actually fucking hate this. Cool. So now
I can't wait to help more people. Not fucking
bro. Yeah, no, PT is overrated as shit. So I guess you're to your point of like, how did I get into like pairing this with jiu-jitsu and with veterans? It happened by accident, man. So literally the first jiu-jitsu retreat, I always thought that I would put on jiu-jitsu retreats because I really want to be an instructor. I'm only a blue belt right now, but I love teaching. And being a physical therapist, that's actually our job, is teaching movement skills to people who don't know them. And that's all that a jiu-jitsu instructor does. And I'm sure being good at jiu-jitsu and being good at teaching jiu-jitsu have actually nothing to do with each other. So I aspire to be an instructor. I aspire to put on jiu-jitsu camps. And then I thought that I would be doing that like 10 years from now. And then my wife is planning a women's retreat, like a women's yoga thing with a friend of hers. We pay a $3,000 non-refundable deposit for a retreat center. And then said friend backs out and they have a falling out, and the friend is like, you know what, you just do it. I don't even want to be a part of it. And Cordy's like, well, that was never the plan. And I was like, I just paid $3,000 for this event that's not going to happen. What the fuck are we going to do? Because money's a little bit tight at this moment in my life. And so Cordy, my wife Cordy, said, well, you've always wanted to do a jiu-jitsu camp. Why don't we do that? And I basically said, yeah, why don't we do that? And so in the next 10 months, we planned and executed the first jiu-jitsu camp, the first Flowstate retreat. I think it was massively successful in terms of, everyone had an amazing time. Everyone had a transformative experience, which I don't think anyone anticipated. Like, especially because it was the first one, they thought they were just doing jiu-jitsu in Mexico. And they were like, oh, I can smoke weed? Cool. And then what actually happened is that we had a temazcal, which is a traditional Aztec and Mayan sweat lodge ceremony. And like all these dudes are bawling their eyes out in the sweat lodge ceremony.
No. Wow.
And then we do a holotropic breathwork ceremony. My wife is trained in holotropic breathwork. And then same thing. We have a room full of like these like warrior tough dudes who are fucking sobbing and like screaming and shaking and writhing on the ground. And we were microdosing in the mornings, and all these people, like their anxiety just completely fell away. And it was kind of funny because people were taking the microdoses and they were like, oh, I don't think I feel anything. Like, can I take more tomorrow? And I was like, well, talk to me about how you felt when you were rolling today. Because we would microdose and meditate at 6:45 in the morning and then go into jiu-jitsu class and then rolling. And I was like, so how'd you feel? And they were like, well, my jiu-jitsu was like really fluid. Like I felt really like on game. I was like, nice. And they were like, yeah. And, I didn't have like the voices that are normally in my head, like thinking about bills and work and stuff like that. That wasn't there either. And I was like, that's the point. Like you successfully, like that's it. Like you did it. You did the thing. You don't need more. Like that was the point. You had an amazing time. Your jiu-jitsu was on point and you don't feel stressed or anxious. Like that is it right there. And they're like, oh yeah. So I think it was really eye-opening for these people, just showing them like what intentional plant medicine use can be. Mm-hmm. And then I still haven't actually talked about the veteran thing. So this is like the most long-winded, disjointed answer ever, bro. I apologize. The veteran piece comes in because we had this microdosing program where, separate from the jiu-jitsu retreats, we were teaching people how to get into microdosing, because my wife and I have worked with this stuff for years. And it started off just as like one friend kind of hits us up and is like, hey, I'm interested in this. Can you like tell me what to do? Mm-hmm. And we would just kind of give some advice and point them in the right direction. And then they would, without fail, come back for like more advice, or they had questions or stuff was coming up that they didn't understand how to process and they kind of needed help to move through it. And so we started like actually charging for it, because people take things more seriously when you actually pony up a little bit of money for it.
Yes.
And we would structure it as like, you'll have 3 calls with us or whatever. We'll give you some advice, like take the microdoses, come back, we'll talk about it. And it quickly became obvious that just wasn't serving people as good as we could have been serving people, right? Like it became clear that people needed more and that we were able to give them more coaching, more help. And so we started fleshing out this entire 3-month structure. Like we built it into a 3-month training plan, if you will, just like I was doing with like a 3-month rehab program. It's almost like a rehab program for your mental health. And so we started rolling this out. We enrolled some people in it. And then honestly, I think it was just because I had a relationship with Seb already and he kind of saw the stuff that I was doing. He put me in touch with Toby and he was like, hey, dude, this guy needs some help. Maybe you can help him. And put Toby through our program, took him down to Peru with us, and saw how much that changed his life, how deeply that changed his and his wife's life and relationship. And then Toby just started talking about us to like all of his friends. And so it just very naturally occurred that we all of a sudden had 10 veterans come talk to us who wanted to sign up and wanted to go through this program. And so the process is now just sort of iterating, where I just had this other guy, Damien, also Canadian veteran, go through our microdosing program, come down to Peru with me. And he has like, I don't know, 180,000 followers on Instagram, because he's like this famous artist. And so it's been like a very organic thing. I never set out to like, I want to help veterans. It just kind of
they're just knocking on your door like, hey, you're the dude that helps veterans. Like, I guess so.
Yeah, I guess I am.
I help people. You just happen to be a veteran. Yeah.
It's kind of funny though, honestly, because that happened when I worked at this PT clinic. I developed this reputation as like the guy to go see for like chronic pain patients, depression, fibromyalgia, and like cancer patients. They like sought me out in the area because I just like fucking listened to them and I was like a nice person. And that's actually a novel thing for a doctor to listen to you. And so I developed this reputation, and like all these people referred all their friends to me. And my entire caseload was like these old grumpy women with like fibromyalgia or breast cancer. And, it was interesting, but it's almost like the same thing has happened here, where kind of one person, I just stumbled ass backwards into helping one guy, and turns out we were actually really good at helping him. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, my communication style and all of my skills as a physical therapist, like bringing that all to bear in this sort of context, it turns out I'm actually like very good at this, and the results speak for themselves. Like, I don't mean to sound like egotistical when I say that, but like anyone who fucking knows Toby before and after, like, you know the difference. And I don't personally take credit for that, but it's just, we've created this program where you can't like that. Those results are almost, it can't not happen. If you follow the structure that we've created, if you work with the medicine in the intentional way that we teach you to, and if you commit to it and surrender to the medicine, and if you're on board, it's going to happen. So that's a super long-winded, not very coherent answer to your question.
It's great. We're a long-form podcast here, so that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for that long, drawn-out story, which meandered to, you know, how you got to actually help veterans in a tangible way. And, you know, you mentioned Toby, and, you know, as a date of recording this, like, we've had a conversation, I haven't published it yet, but the thing that stuck out to me, like, I let him talk, man. And the thing that stood out the most was the amount of medication that he was on to what he's on now. Yeah. And I didn't have any, other than the fact that I followed him on Instagram or in the same chat group, I didn't know him. So it was great to actually have the conversation, because I posted something about another psychedelic retreat that my friend had started in Colombia just recently. And he's made a comment like, hey, man, like, I used to be the medicated Mohican. Now I'm the unmedicated Mohican on Instagram. That's his handle. And the reason for that is because I no longer need meds from Veterans Affairs. And the reason why is because I did a few ayahuasca ceremonies, I think. And then he also did the psilocybin with you guys. And like, it's put his brain basically back together so that he doesn't have any of these major outbursts, and he's able to get through a regular day, and him and his wife have a stronger connection. And as he's saying this, I'm just thinking, holy crap, man, like, the power that this has, this is fixing the problem. This is going deep into the root issue, not taking care just of the symptoms, which that's our Western way of taking care of things. It's like, well, you're having anger outbursts, you're depressed. Here, take some SSRIs. Yeah, but they don't show to be really effective, and they make your dick soft, and there's a whole wealth of issues with it. I'm not dealing with the issue that's causing the problem.
Yeah.
Can I actually deal with that issue? And it seems like modern medicine has just closed. It's like a black box. It's closed itself off to the human aspect of healing, which requires community, which requires, you know, plant medicine, which requires sunlight, which requires activity, which all these things. It's not just there's no pill. There's no pill that does it. And I'm sure you can attest to it too, right? That part of the ceremony is bringing yourself together and closer with community and the planet, and
absolutely
very hippie like things that typically aren't a veteran domain, where most of us are like, fuck those hippies, you know, like, but then when we get out, you know, like the typical stereotype of the peace, love, and like happiness Vietnam veteran with the long hair. Well, we're seeing kind of that iteration now with the global war on terror veterans. We're figuring out that, man, we need something different, because, you know, we mentioned before, the rate of suicide is insane. It's taken way more lives than the Taliban and Al Qaeda have.
Yeah.
That is so depressing and mind numbing to wrap your head around, because, you know, I have my theories, but ultimately, like, the individual is so crushed by what we did over there. And there's no hope for those individuals. Now, I've never been suicidal, so I can't speak to it personally, but I can only imagine what's going on in your mind. But then to have something like what you're doing, which combines physicality and that connection with nature and plant medicine. So why the unification of BJJ and plant medicine is my question.
Yeah, thank you for basically just reiterating your first question after I rambled for half an hour.
No, I asked why veggies. Now it's why BJJ.
Okay, so fair.
So you're being too hard on yourself, Dave. You're being too hard.
Yeah. So again, something I kind of stumbled into. So I started training jiu-jitsu back when I was just a normal ass physical therapist. And I had this idea to maybe start a business doing PT just for BJJ guys, which I did end up doing for about 3 years. And then I told you the story of kind of how this jiu-jitsu retreat materialized almost by accident. But really, it does underpin this deeper belief that I have. To me, I see jiu-jitsu as sort of the ultimate spiritual pursuit. I think that jiu-jitsu can be a deeply and profoundly spiritual experience, and I don't think enough people look at it that way. It's like it has the potential to be this spiritual thing. It has the potential to be like the ultimate vehicle for self-growth and self-exploration. I believe that jiu-jitsu is a mirror for every other aspect of your life. So like my jiu-jitsu game, it reflects how I'm showing up in my business. It reflects how I'm showing up in my relationship. If I'm being too like passive, if I'm being too, quick to react to things. So that's kind of how I've always seen jiu-jitsu ever since I started, was that it has the potential to be this really powerful transformational force within somebody's life. Because someone who joins jiu-jitsu, they're looking to push themselves. They're looking to be challenged. They're looking to learn something new. They're looking to gain confidence. They're looking for all of these things, right? Unfortunately, if you join a kind of shitty gym, all you find are people beating the shit out of each other. You don't find any sort of philosophy. You don't find any sort of new ideas. All you find is jiu-jitsu, which is cool, but I think it can be so much more. And for years, man, since I started training, I've kind of wrestled with like, how do I get people to see that? And how do I get people to talk about that? Because like I'm super into like Taoist philosophy and like Miyamoto Musashi, right? So like my podcast is called The Way Broadly, from that quote, when you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. And that's what I'm talking about with jiu-jitsu, man. Like, give you an example. My jiu-jitsu game, I'm super fucking lazy in everything. I procrastinate on everything. I always have. And my jiu-jitsu game is like reactive, quote unquote. Like, I'll just wait for him to do something and then I'll counter it. Like that doesn't actually work at all against someone better than you. It also doesn't fucking work to just procrastinate. Like there's no reacting to your opponent in business. Like I have to go get clients or else I don't make money and then I can't feed my child. Like that doesn't fly. And so
it's
similarly,
a big responsibility.
yeah, my wife is 6 months pregnant. So that's like on my mind 24/7 now. Yeah. But anyway, so I think that jiu-jitsu is this reflection of everything else in life. I think that people who seek to join jiu-jitsu, that's actually what they're seeking. Whether or not they can consciously articulate it, you are not just seeking to learn how to choke people. If that was really what you're interested in, like you'd probably just buy a gun or like do Krav Maga, because like that's like having a gun is better self-defense than having jiu-jitsu, right? So like if you're joining jiu-jitsu, you're actually seeking all these other things. You just might not know it or know how to articulate it. And again, if you don't join the right environment, that won't be there for you. So I've been lucky enough to have friends and mentors who are on this wavelength. I've been lucky enough to explore plant medicine on my own and listen to enough fucking Joe Rogan podcasts to be interested in all of this stuff. And I really wrestled for a while with like, how do I bring this conversation about like psychedelics, exploration of the consciousness, transformation of the self? How do I bring that conversation to the forefront in jiu-jitsu? And to me, these jiu-jitsu retreats that I'm doing now are sort of just one element of that. It's like a physical place for people to congregate and have this experience. The reason that I think it's important to sort of build that, like create this cultural movement. So on my podcast, I had an episode once where I talked about microdosing. I talked about microdosing when I trained jiu-jitsu. I go to jiu-jitsu the next day. This is in Saddlebrook, New Jersey at 6 a.m. on like a Wednesday morning. 4 separate individuals came up to me and said, dude, I listened to the podcast. I microdose when I train also. So there were 5 of us in this academy, all microdosing. And the 5 people had no idea that the other people were microdosing because we thought you weren't supposed to talk about that shit. It wasn't until I just like talked about it on a podcast, and people listened to it, that they came up and talked to me. So that's kind of why like the role that I see myself in is like giving a voice to this underlying movement, because I think it is an underlying movement. Like psychedelics are experiencing a renaissance right now. You talked about, I think before we hit record, what you coined like the veteran renaissance of all these guys getting into jiu-jitsu, all these guys seeking healing. So I feel like the tide is rising, dude. And I'm just trying to be like the first guy hitting it with the fucking surfboard saying like, hey guys, come on in. Like the water in here is nice. Like get on this wavelength with me. So that's kind of how I see my role now.
It's super cool. I'm just going to bring up your website here, Becoming Home. So this is where you can get a ton of the information here about the actual retreat itself. I'm just blown away that something that I was conceptualizing. Like, man, there should be something that incorporates a little bit of fighting and psychedelics. I'm like, I wonder if that exists. And then it just so happened that Toby came on the podcast and started talking about it. And then it freaked me out because I'm starting to get really into just manifestation and being able to manifest the things that you want in life. And it freaks me out when I think about this, and I don't say it. I didn't really say anything. I just had a thought. I wonder if this is a thing that exists. And Toby starts talking about this. And I'm like, holy shit, this does exist. So this is something that is getting started. And you're talking about this as a cultural thing. And I think you're 100% on the mark with that. The idea of, especially in this case, you know, if we keep it in the veteran context, we've finished up one of the largest or the longest histories of war in like Western civilization, essentially. Like the modern era. It was 20 plus years, global war and terror. It was long, man. Like 20 years of war. Like that's long for any period of history. And we're all back in the sense that, you know, the ones that made it back, we're done fighting. We're dealing with our injuries, but we're starting to get to that phase where it's like we've stabilized them and now we're starting to feel better. But it's taken a while. You know, it's taken like 5-6 years since like the last bit of real hard combat was over. And to touch on like the veteran renaissance thing, this is where we get to kind of express where we want to go with our lives, how we want to give back. And on top of that, we haven't seen this in our society for 80 years plus, because World War II is like the last big push of veterans. And here in Canada, we haven't seen really any big push of veterans, and we're young. And that's the thing that I think is crucial for most people to understand, is that we're in our 30s and 40s. And we want to keep on not just identifying, but touching back to that warrior ethos. And I had a great guest on, Dr. Gino Kalura. I don't know if you know, aware of his work. Who
I'm familiar.
Yeah, he's done the actual research on how jiu-jitsu like is a healing practice, not just for veterans, just in general, but especially for veterans, because it brings you face to face with danger, literally, and then it rebuilds trust. And he brought up a good point. The trust thing is something that gets broken if you've done a bunch of deployments, because when you go overseas, everybody was in the same clothes. You didn't know if they were enemy or not, so you had to perceive that everybody was a potential threat. That's not a normal thing to learn. And then how do you get rid of that coding when you come back? He's like, well, jiu-jitsu allows you to realize, hey, like this guy that I don't know, or this gal that I don't know, we're gonna go hard, but we also know there's some guidelines here. A tap means stop. I'm not going to try to break your arm, but it is aggressive, and there is that element of danger, and your brain can't really tell the difference. Like if you're getting choked, you're getting choked. So I thought that was a brilliant way to kind of bring, the veteran community together in a a competitive space, but that also brings in the warrior type thing where you're fighting, but also brings in community. And it seems to be all coming together at the same time. And I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu until maybe 4 years ago when I first heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only because of MMA that it started to pop up on my radar. But it seems to be all coming together at the right time where folks need a helping hand, especially in the veteran community. This is providing something that wasn't here for me in the 80s or 90s, and wasn't there for my parents, wasn't there for my dad. So where do you see this going in the future? I mean, I think you're really on to something, man. Like this is really cool. It seems like something like this could definitely, catch the eye of those individuals that are, that hold the keys to purse strings for healing for veterans. But ultimately, like I've talked to many experts, and they say, like, especially for dudes, we need to heal in a community shoulder to shoulder, and it needs to be at a grassroots level. Because if you do that way, rather than have these big, massive programs that basically treat you like you're just a number, as opposed to this, where you're actually doing some work, you're chatting, and like you're saying, you're doing like sweat lodges and stuff like that, and guys are just like all out, just crying and laying it all out. Like, where do you see this going? Do you see this as something that could be like a national level thing? Do you think this is something that would be incorporated at more of a tactical level with like police departments, military units? Like, I'm just curious to know, like, do you see this like going to a next step?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I've spent some time kind of visualizing, thinking about what this can be, but then also, honestly, I've spent most of my time like in the trenches, if you will, of like, I don't have much money in the bank right now, and I have a pregnant wife, and we live in Mexico where I'm separate from all of my support systems. So like I need to build something that is going to provide for my family. So I actually think that I do probably need to spend more time taking that step back and thinking about where do I want to steer the ship. But to answer your question, I see this as a cultural movement, a cultural revolution within jiu-jitsu, and maybe even more specifically within the veteran jiu-jitsu community, where, I want every man, woman, and child on earth to train jiu-jitsu, but I'm not necessarily the guy to like evangelize jiu-jitsu and get people into it. I kind of want to focus my efforts on like dudes who are training, but know that they're missing something. They're missing some sort of connection to something deeper. So I see this becoming like a cultural thing within jiu-jitsu. Like you see dudes with like jiu-jitsu shirts, and like everyone recognizes like, oh, that guy's a purple belt. He's got like whatever shirt on. Like we made gi patches for my retreat. Like I want you to walk into any gym in America and be like, oh, that dude went to the Flowstate retreat. Like cool. That's a cool fucking guy right there. Like if I see someone wearing that patch, I know that I can go talk to them about microdosing. I know that I can go talk to that guy about my fucking depression, and I know that he's going to get it because he's on board with this. So kind of big picture wise, that's where I wanted to get to. On a sort of tactical level, like you said, like working with police departments and stuff, it's actually a really interesting idea. On like the civilian camp side, my friend Joe Campisi was the instructor that we brought in, and he's an amazing guy. I love him. He's got plans already to sort of like host different gyms, like have like a Henzo Gracie New York retreat. One of his buddies has like 7 gyms in Colorado, so like do a retreat just for that guy to like bring his community down. So I guess I'm becoming like a retreat organizing company, also by accident.
It's the best way to be an entrepreneur, man. It's like the man finds you, and you're like, oh, I guess I gotta do this now. Yeah, like the hustle finds you, which is great.
Do you know Naval Ravikant? Does that name mean anything to you?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just reading a book of his for pitching to like investors and stuff, and it just happens to be one of his like original books. Cool. And so I follow him on. Dude,
Naval's the man. Also, are you familiar with Akira the Don? He's a music artist.
Oh man, he popped up on my radar. It's he, right? Popped up on my radar. Yeah, exactly. It's the name's familiar, but again, it's like these things that like, because I I think we follow the same circles, right? Like it's
So
Joe
stuff just pops
Rogan.
up. Yeah, 100%.
So like the algorithm knows like you're probably going to like this guy.
100%. But the reason I say it, so Akira the Don's this artist who takes like audio clips of like lectures or podcasts or whatever, and he cuts it up into music tracks, and they're fucking awesome. But that's where I like got turned on to Naval. And one of the things that Naval said once was, make a decision to be the best in the world at what you do, and then keep redefining what you do until that statement is true. Right? So I was not the best in the world at being a physical therapist. I am not the best in the world physical therapist for jiu-jitsu athletes. I know the guys who are. I can refer you to them, but I'm not that guy. What am I the best in the entire world at is bringing plant medicine and spirituality to the jiu-jitsu community. I literally apprentice with indigenous Shipibo ayahuasca shamans in Peru and like organize retreats for them and translate for them because they don't speak English. So I'm an apprentice to indigenous medicine people. I'm a doctor and I train jiu-jitsu, and I somehow became friends with the likes of people like Seb and this guy Casey Pippett, who's like an ex-Army Ranger, and just stumbled into all this shit. So like I don't know where you fall with like religion and, you know, is there a plan for all of us? But I think that each person has a purpose, a dharma, if you will. And I think the closer you get to expressing that, the more everything in your life just flows. And so that's when I say I've kind of stumbled into all this by accident. It's not really an accident, because I think I'm just getting closer and closer to what I was put on this earth to do. And I'm just trying to embrace that. And it wasn't always easy, man. Like letting go of doing physical therapy was something I really struggled with, because like I invested my entire life into it. I paid thousands upon thousands of dollars, well, hundreds of thousands of dollars for PT school, which I still owe the government. And then,
and you can't get out of.
Oh, dude, I know. And then like, I don't know, 20 grand to like business coaches to teach me how to like run an online PT company. And now I don't even do that. But of course, it's all perfect because like I use the skills that I gained from that to do what I do now. So I couldn't be where I am now without going through that. But yeah, I don't know, man. Back to your question of like, where's this all going? I just want to help more people. I'll be honest, I want to profit from doing that. Like I got a little baby girl coming. I need to make money. It's definitely, profit is not at the forefront of what we do. I make almost no money. I usually lose money from the ayahuasca retreats in Peru, just getting myself there and back. We do have this like microdosing program now, which I see as being kind of like my main job. Where like each month we're enrolling groups of people. And so some of them are closed just for veterans. Some of them are open to anybody. We've got some that are for veterans and their spouses specifically, where it's like my wife and I kind of working with like the husband and wife duo kind of thing. And then we've got these retreats, man. I just see this going wherever it takes me. One of the things that is most important to me, I always joke, like I try to make social media social again, because I like relationships with people are actually really important to me. And like my podcast, for example, I've gotten nothing, like no return from like having a guest on and then like his audience hears about me or whatever. The return has come from, I'm just friends with that dude now. So like I had Seb on my podcast. I didn't know him before. A friend of mine was like, hey, you should interview this guy, Seb. I was like, okay. And now we're friends. And now he's coming to teach at my jiu-jitsu retreat. So building relationships and connections with cool, authentic people will always pan out. So I put a lot of stock in that. So back to that question of like, where's this going? I don't know, man. Hopefully somewhere that helps a lot of people and continues to make relationships and provides for my family.
I love it. I love it. The aspect of entrepreneurship that I think a lot of people miss if they're not entrepreneurs, like the connection to self, because it's such a big deal, man. Like, and
everything.
now that, it turns into like literally everything. And it's no longer, from my perspective, it's no longer work. It's just who I am. So when people say work-life balance, I'm like, that's only for people that have jobs, man. For me, I am this. Like I do the podcast, I do the coaching, I go to the retreats. So I'm always working. I just had this conversation yesterday with Jason Khalipa about the whole idea of being able to just have work for, like an example, like for your kids. Back in the day, they understood what you were doing. Like you would go work in a coal mine, you would build a table, you would like at the end of the day, you had something. So your kids could be like, oh, it's work. But now they see me on a computer, they see me recording a podcast, they see me writing text messages. So they may not see you as working hard because for them, it's just gadgets. But you gotta take them and do the hard shit. Like you gotta take them on the hikes. You gotta take them do jujitsu. You gotta do these things with them and for them so that they can see, oh no, that's badass. Like he works his ass off in the gym. Like he's putting in the work. And like entrepreneurship is just one of those things. As the kids get older, be like, oh man, you really worked your ass off. And the fruits of your labor, you're bang on with the podcast. Like I started mine a few years ago. It's like I don't make any money. Yeah. And I think a lot of people forget that if you're in this game long enough, it's because you love it. And like you said, follow that, like whatever that you're the absolute best in the world in and what you love doing. And then you just wait for that, frequency to kind of mesh up with the rest of the universe. And then, whatever you define as success will follow. And like, I totally agree with you. You're putting out that right energy, right? And that energy eventually, you meet people that have the same frequency. And I've totally changed my mindset on a lot of things in my last, especially since having kids. I've become a lot more spiritual in that sense, become more religious when I thought, I'll never be religious again. Yeah. And it's all because I see it like this big picture, as you mentioned earlier, right? That there's something out there. I don't quite know what it is, but there's definitely some like unifying force, but you have to tap into it and you have to be willing to actually go and be scared and do the stuff like what you're doing here and doing the retreat. So really cool that you're putting yourself out there and man, like if we can get a bunch of people coming down to the retreat and getting more eyeballs on it, this is just something that's growing, man. And jack up those rates, man. Jack up those rates. Let's get some profit heading your way. I like, and that's the thing too. Like especially in the veteran space, when we start businesses, we want to give kind of like the veteran rate. Oh, but I had to have 100%. This like. I had to have this moment where I'm like, wait, hold on a sec. If somebody wants to spend their money, who would they rather pick? If it's like apples to apples, same trainer, same podcast, whatever. If I was in that boat, well, I would rather, give my money to the veteran. And then I had to get over the fact that no, like they have to understand this helps feed my family. Yeah. This is what I do. Yeah. So I don't want a discount for my buddy. Full price, whatever it is. I don't want the 10% discount. So, I think we're starting to come to that realization too here in the veteran community that, hey, like, this guy's doing good stuff. Let's give him full rate. And so definitely I can't wait to see where your retreat goes in the future and how big this gets. And however we can help here with the Hard Podcast, we'll definitely love to do that. So, Dave, what are some final thoughts and ultimately, where can people start following you, reaching out, and getting more information on the retreats and just more about you?
Yeah, man. If you want to just follow me personally, it's kind of like half personal, half business. My Instagram is David Z BJJ. It used to be like Dave Zwoboda, like first initial last name, and then I was at the Origin Jiu Jitsu camp, like Jocko Willink's camp, and I was trying to like market my PT shit, and I was like, no one will be able to find this, so I made it easier. David Z BJJ. But yeah, and then Becoming Om is kind of the name of like our company that all of this stuff falls under. That was my wife's yoga stuff before we got together, and now it's just taken over by jiu-jitsu retreats. But you can find info on the microdosing program for civilians and veterans on becomingom.com. Find info on our ayahuasca retreats down in Peru, and find info on the Operation Flowstate jiu-jitsu retreat there as well. Yeah, man, we've got our next event is in October of this year. So like a month from now, actually, we're going to have our first Operation Flowstate. So our first retreat exclusively for vets and first responders. If you can't make it to that, I know it's like pretty last minute. We've got like an email list that you can sign up for and get notified of like all the future events, because these retreats are intentionally kept very small. It's like 18 people, absolute maximum. So they're going to start selling out very quickly as more and more people hear about it. So if you're on that email list, like you'll get first dibs before it even goes live to the public. So we just released the dates for another 2 weeks of camp for civilians again in May of 2024. And that's kind of currently in this like pre-sale phase, right? So like not everyone can even sign up for it yet. It's just people who are on that list and who came to the last one and told me they're interested. So if that's something that you want to be a part of, like get on the email list. And I don't just say that because like I want to build my fucking email list, but because there's 18 spots and they're going to sell out. So you want to be there, get on the email list.
Love it.
We do have, it's funny what you said before with the veteran prices and stuff. I just did up the prices considerably for the civilian camp next year. The veteran retreats kind of have a veteran discount baked into it, but that also is going to increase because I want to be able to donate some money to some organizations like Heroic Hearts Project or other organizations like that in order to kind of promote access to these things. And then one other piece on that, actually, this is really interesting, is I've got a guy right now who's trying to come to this camp in October. He's a Canadian dude. And there's apparently some Canadian Veterans Affairs program where they will reimburse you or they'll like cover the cost of like healing modalities of your choosing, essentially.
Yes.
And so he's going through the paper. Yeah. So he's going through the paperwork right now to get the Canadian government to pay for that. And so I was like, you are going in the most expensive room, sir, if the fucking Canadian government is paying for it. You're getting the penthouse, which costs more. For real, dude. This is the Canadian government paying for it, man. You don't need a shared room. Fuck that. So if that pans out, bro, like that solves my fucking financial woes because I'll just start doing like Canadian only groups and fuck yeah, jacking that price up if the government's paying for it.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, we'll have a conversation at the end when we stop recording here. There's a few other things that we'll dial you into and see if we can get a little bit more traction for you. So
cool.
For sure, the programs exist. It's just finding out where and who to contact. And yeah, that'd be great, man. And you know, at the end of the day, man, stories like Toby's and other stories from other friends I have, so they're all anecdotal. It's all pointing in the direction that this is a major breakthrough when it comes to healing. And at the end of the day, that's the business that the VA and Veterans Affairs here in Canada are in.
Supposed to be in.
Big caveat. Supposed to be. When they're not recommending that you off yourself, they're in the business of trying to get you better. So I've had a good experience from day one, and most do. It's just the bad apples, like any organization, rear their ugly heads and tarnish the whole thing. So, with that being said, Dave, I really appreciate you sharing everything about your background and what you're doing for veterans with your jiu-jitsu and microdosing retreat. I think it's a really novel concept, and at some point, there's so many retreats and awesome things I want to do. It comes down to is the government going to pony up, and where do I scrape together the cash to do everything? It's just a matter of time before I do them all. So really appreciate your insights and what you're doing, man, and continued success. And I'd love to have an update from you in the future as to what's going on and what's coming up with the program. So continued success,
right on, man. Awesome, dude. Thank you so much.
Cool. So, folks, thanks for tuning in again. Don't forget, train hard, fight easy. See you on the next one. Peace. I hate t-shirts that get floppy in the arms after 10 washes. So that's why I created a bunch of t-shirts with high quality cotton just for you so that you can go to the gym and look fresh, sport some philosophy, and smash those PRs looking good. So you need to head to davemorrow.net/merch, grab yourself a hat, grab yourself a t-shirt, grab yourself a sweater, and support the cause today.